Hello everyone, welcome to Inspected Goals, the pod that tries to improve our FPL play through a more analytical approach. We are back, Sam, after a week's hiatus from holiday. You were out in the Outback camping, I hear. I've come back from Greece. How was the time off, bud?
Yeah, it was great. It's always one of my favourite weeks of the year. We go away and lead on a kids camp over the summer, but you feel very tired afterwards, so it doesn't feel like a holiday in that way. But it also means I've watched less football over the last week, so you have to excuse me for that. I don't know if you're the same.
Yeah, very much so. Very tired. Only got back at, ended up being about 2:15 in the morning after my flight got delayed on the way in and on the way out, unfortunately. But it was a very good holiday with my
Great.
kids, so tiring as well, as you can imagine. And tried to sneak away, get down the pub on occasion because the hotel I was staying in didn't actually show the football, so I could sneak off every now and then. But there's only so much you can justify that to the family to just say I'm going to the pub to watch it. So I watched a couple of the matches, but nowhere near as many as I'd like, and I need to catch up with that this week, to be honest, because I missed the cracker, especially for the Man City game. I haven't seen that game at all yet, so devastated about that. But
Sure.
yeah, it was good. It was good to have a little break. We're back refreshed and ready to go, though.
I was back on Saturday, so I managed to see the Man City game on the Sunday. It was class. Yeah, what a game of football. I don't know if I assume you've seen the highlights.
I've seen the
Um,
highlights, yeah.
it wasn't even, yeah, it wasn't even like Newcastle just like nicked a goal. The whole game they were brilliant. They just played so well. Took the game to City. I think that's what made it so entertaining. The fact it was actually a close match rather than the drama of like a lesser team
Mm.
nicking a goal and Man City being frustrated. It was pretty. It was close. It was great. Great game of football. And then I managed to watch the second half of the Arsenal game as well. Seen all the highlights.
Mm.
Yeah, excited to get back into chatting about it. How was actual FPL going for you then?
Not great. Like most, I think the game week was a bit of a shambles, wasn't it? My original planned move was going to be Gabriel to Perisic. If I didn't start with Perisic, obviously given the leaks that we had early, I abandoned the plan of having him. And then saved the money, so I had zero point 0.5 in the bank for Gabriel to Perisic game week 3 if I knew he was going to start. And I kind of thought, do you know what, I'm not going to take the punt, even though I think he's going to start, just because it's probably going to cause me some issues later. And I'm trying to avoid these punts that I do all the time, like in that regard, and play in a more analytical way. So I thought I'll keep off him. Sod's Law, he goes and scores 12. That's one of the games I actually watched, to be fair. Spurs were awful in the first half, but Perisic was much better in the second. But I'm not beating myself up about that. I know he's a great pick if you can get the minutes right, and there's obviously, we're going to talk about it in a bit, but there's potentially some issues with him now coming into the coming game weeks. But I actually ended up swapping Robertson for Diaz, essentially, because I had my 2 free transfers. I bought in Cucurella for Robertson and then bought in Diaz for Neto. So the only reason I really did that, I mean, review suggested it to me, was the number one reason I did it. The second reason was that they were going down in price, Neto and Robertson potentially. So it was more about saving the money. And otherwise, I didn't really know what I'd do. I just ended up burning a transfer. So even though I thought Robertson would actually do well, he didn't. I think he ended up on 0 points, didn't he? I think he did. Cucurella did the same. So points-wise, 44 for me, which is, I think, 4 below the average. And yeah, Perisic outscored my entire back line, my back 5, and my goalkeeper. But rest of the team was fine. I had Martinelli, had Jesus, had Haaland, and had Salah captain, which pretty much saved the game week, to be fair. And Andres Pereira with 8 points on the bench, which at one stage was looking like he may come in for me, depending on the Man City team. But I've got Cancelo, whereas others had Diaz. But we'll talk about that again in a while.
Yeah.
So I think you had quite similar points as well, didn't you?
Even worse, mate. I got 39 in the end. The only players who returned for me were Martinelli, Haaland, and Salah captaincy. So it was a really bad week. But yeah, because of it being early in the season, actually a surprisingly low amount of people owning Salah, relatively. Like that captaincy actually helped my rank a lot. But whether it helped me against managers who we're going to be competing with at the end of the season, I'm not sure. I also, same thing. I had Pereira first sub, started Williams instead. Fancied the clean sheet, well, a chance of a clean sheet against Everton, which was close. And yeah, I had a really one of those frustrating moments where, because I was away, just completely missed a price drop. So I sold Bailey, but I've now got 0.4 in the back instead of 0.5, which is really frustrating at this stage.
Yeah, annoying.
But no, okay, like my rank I think is about 2 million or something like that. But at this stage, I'm like maybe 10 points off 1 million. So not too concerned about anything, and still undecided on my decisions for next week.
Yeah, have you got 2 free transfers now?
Yeah, I still got 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes it tricky. Yeah, it's the price. We haven't really talked about it much, I suppose, but the price changes do annoy me slightly still. I don't like the way that it works. I do think that it's important to keep them because it creates that strategy part of the game that is quite intriguing. And I do like the whole idea of risk versus reward to some extent. But I think when they literally make you almost have to move to someone that you don't particularly like over the option you've got, and I know that there is a decision, you don't have to do it, but it does feel like you get backed into corners sometimes to do it, and it creates more templatey teams, I think. Again, I've talked about it before, the best managers in the world somehow manage to just completely ignore them. But losing that 0.1 now, as you're going to allude to, just have a massive effect on you early doors, doesn't it?
It does early in the season when a lot of the differences are 0.5 in players. So I'd have a really easy, simple transfer decision this week, like Iverson to Sanchez or Williams to Dunk. It would be for me, but I can't do that in one move now. So now it's a tricky decision about who I downgrade. So it affects things like that, I guess. And I think the thing I feel sorry for people who don't live in. Well, I suppose in Western Europe, where we are, there's the price changes happen in the middle of the night. Yeah. So at least you know I'll do it before the end of the day, and you wake up and see them. But if it happens in the middle of like your working day or something like that, I don't know. I just find that must be frustrating.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and I wonder if in general it'd be helpful if they were just the same time. If price changes were just once a week, like on the deadline or after the deadline. Or
I think it should be a deadline for each week. The prices are changed each week. Yeah, I think that would work pretty well, and actually tell you who's going up and down as well. I know that would still force similar moves, but at least it would allow you a week to keep a player. Like I know Robertson didn't end up scoring well. I didn't want to sell Robertson ahead of the game particularly. It just feels like a move that could easily backfire and ruin your weekend. I didn't want to do it, but ended up having to do it unless I wanted to burn a transfer. I think that would work better personally. But yeah, after the back of a pretty shocking week, I see some talk in the community while I was away about wildcarding, when to wildcard, and it's obviously one of our subjects today. It always feels after a bad week that you need to try and do something about your team, but I don't think that's always the case. So yeah, when to wildcard. Do you have any thoughts at the moment? Is there any particular point in time that you've looked at, or any particular game week where you focused in? I know early season we were thinking sort of halfway. Has that changed at all?
Yeah. So in my head it's going to be game week 8 or 9, I think. But like I'm willing to be flexible on that. But I just don't think I'll need to be, because this year, again, because we've gone on about it, because the prices are so low, it's very, very easy to have a team you're happy with, to be honest. And so I think it's unlikely that even in 2 weeks I'll suddenly think, I've got loads of problems in my team, unless there's like loads of injuries or something. It could happen, like maybe, but I can't see it. But as in previous years, he probably had more diversity and less of a template. So there was more of that need to be. So I guess probably okay, fine. But like I'm not set on that by any means. I like the idea of having 2 transfers the week before I wildcard, and then being able to do something for that 1 week if a big team has a bad fixture. So for example, I believe in game week 8, Liverpool play Chelsea, I think it is. So that's quite a nice one where you could just like for 1 week sell Salah for KDB, Son, whoever has the better fixture, for example, and you can wildcard them straight in if there's not lots of price changes. So I like the idea with a wildcard, and I think in general, if you're panicking and think you might need to wildcard, just wait and maybe think about it the next day, because it can be easy, like you said, emotionally to think you need to. And like I'm in that kind of position now where like I think previous seasons, like when I was playing more casually, maybe like 4 or 5 seasons ago, I would like wildcard about now because I'm annoyed because I've got Saka and Robertson and they're not doing anything. Whereas you have to think logically, they're still really good picks, and not panic.
Yeah, I've got literally no desire to wildcard. Like my team's okay. It was a poor score. I think there's there's players that I'd like to have in my team. You can't have them all, and I think letting other people make. I think it would be a mistake to wildcard this early if your team's in a similar state to say what ours is. I can't speak for everyone. It depends on their particular circumstances. But certainly not off of the back of a game week's result or even 3 games week's result. It's interesting that you said about in game week 8 making 2 free transfers. When I run my team through review, that's exactly what it suggests to me. It actually suggests selling Trent Alexander-Arnold and I can't remember who else it is, but basically bringing in Bruno Fernandes and Trippier for Trent Alexander-Arnold and someone else in game week 8. Just because if I'm going to wildcard in game week 9, it's Diaz. It is switch Diaz to Fernandes.
Yeah.
Then that makes sense to do for that particular week. Up until then, though, on review, I've pretty much got, depending on what settings I put in it, to make no transfers. I've got one plan where it likes doing Haaland to Kane, just simply because of the expected minutes, which we're going to talk about again in a bit. Outside that one transfer, it only likes using those 2 in game week 8 for me, and none the rest of the time, which has been similar apart from this. The whole thing with Robertson and Cucurella, they were the only suggested transfers, and there was an option to burn, which was equally as good. And it just feels like it's that way for a lot of people. I saw FPL Salah on Twitter saying he's going to burn his transfer potentially for the 2nd week running. He's not made a single move yet. It's absolute craziness, isn't it? Really.
It's the prices again, isn't it?
Yeah, they've really messed up there. I think. I don't blame them for the best teams having the best fixtures. Essentially, there's not much you can do about that.
That's true.
It is a good thing that we don't have to make transfers. I see people already saying, it's just terrible, I need to shake it up, I need to do X, Y, Z, and that's why the desire's there. But if there's weeks I've got where I can consider burning a transfer, that is better than having to solve a load of issues, right? I take that end of the spectrum rather than the other side, so I'm not going to complain. And I do think eventually, things will start to change. Inevitably, we will pick up injuries and God knows what else that will affect it. So I'm not in any rush to change my team in any way. I think game week 9 for me is the clear opportunity to wildcard if all goes to plan. Just simply because it's around the middle and there is a few sort of fixture swings. The only issues I've got with the fixture swings there is a lot of the teams that actually you probably would look to bring in at that point. So I've done a little bit of research looking at the fixtures. Are not the teams that have started the best or teams that you would think now at this point I particularly want to have them. So Aston Villa have got a good run from game week 8. I think so if you were to wildcard in game week 9 you would maybe consider some of them players. You've got Bournemouth who, their good run starts from game week 5 to be honest, but it goes on for quite a way. And game week 9 you could easily go into Bournemouth for a few game weeks, and Solanke is the standout pick there, and he's obviously not lit up any fires at the moment because he's not been playing more than anything I would suggest. You've got Brentford who are already on a good run, but they're also good from 9, so you could look to maybe switch to the strikers, Tony and play more up front. I think that's good. The other standout ones are Fulham, Mitrovic. I think he's pretty good from that run. Leicester have a good run, and Crystal Palace stand out, and I do like them. I think they're playing well enough at the moment in hard games where when they have easier games from that run, sort of starts around game week 10. It's a really nice run from that point, and I think that there will be good options. I think Zaha and the likes of Gay or Anderson and Mitchell will be quite popular at that point. So yeah, my concern really there is like if I am going to wildcard for a fixture changes, a lot of the teams I've just mentioned, like I say, are not the top tier teams. They're not the teams that we are used to picking now. It's very hard to look at your team as it is at the moment, see all these star names. I've literally got a Super 6 team, from the top 5 or 6 teams in the league, and I'm potentially going to wildcard to take those guys out and bring in players from Villa, Bournemouth, Brentford, Palace, Everton, Fulham, Leicester I've got a good run as well. It doesn't sound great, but if the fixtures are there and the expected points are there, that's probably what I'm going to end up doing.
It'd be interesting to see. It's just a thought that's just come to mind now you've said that. I wonder if we'll get to game week 8 and 9, and for the reasons you've just mentioned, a lot of people, if they're doing really well and they've got a really good team with lots of those good players, whether they'll just delay it, and then it'll get to within 3 weeks of the World Cup, and they'll think, I'll just use my wild card as a free hit in that last week. I wonder
could be a thing.
Wonder if that'll become a trend. Yeah, it just kind of came to mind when you said that. And what you mentioned there about bad teams having good fixtures, the same is the case for Arsenal in game week 9. They play Spurs. Game week 10 they play Liverpool, but then they're straight into a really good fixture after that against Leeds. So you could end up like dropping 2 or 3 Arsenal players, and then you 2 game weeks later you suddenly want to get all 3 back in, or 2 back in, and you might not have the means to do that. So again, there'll be definitely big decisions to be made around game week 8 and 9 if you do use it then.
I think combined with the fixtures, it's going to be the expected minutes thing, which we're talking about with the top teams playing games every 3 days. the appeal is going to be there that you're just going to get that 90 minutes out of a lot of the players from these teams. But I think there is a balance to be had still. I don't think I'm just going to sell. Man City and Liverpool are favourite to win, as we saw from FPL Chase's graphics. That their XG compared to their opponents is good in virtually every game. Doesn't mean the fixtures don't matter. They obviously do. They still vary depending on the opponent, but they're still of a high enough standard, the teams, where you'd expect them to be able to cope with it. It's more on the minute side than the performance. So I do think there'll be a balance there to be had, not just completely load your team with these players. And it's hard to talk about it now because it's obviously 5 weeks on. We don't know what's going to happen. Maybe some managers can even be sacked by then. I think someone in the chat said, well, Gerrard might be gone by then. It's a very good point. It could be, couldn't he, the way they've started.
Could be, yeah.
But yeah, I think at the moment that's the plan I've got in my head, and I think you did mention it, that if you need to wildcard, then you wildcard, especially this season with the fact that you get that forced one in game week 16. It seems to be less valuable than it's ever been. So I feel like if you need to use it, there's not a problem. But to wildcard because your team didn't do particularly well in game week 3, 2 or 1, I wouldn't say is a good enough reason. If you pick the players for because they are good options on paper, such as Saka, I don't think you just need to wildcard to get rid of Saka ahead of 3 great fixtures. It just seemed mad to me. But there we go.
But I guess, not everyone's in the same position as us, or there'll be people probably listening to this who have only maybe they made a team for their work league for the first time, and they've suddenly decided in game week 2 or 3 to start to I'll start to listen to a podcast, and there might be people listening to this who don't have Salah, for example, or don't have Trent, don't have any Man City defenders, etc. So you might be in a position where you need to wildcard. So I wouldn't take that. Yeah, like you said, don't take that for everyone. For some people, that will be a good idea. And another thing that'll be interesting as well is from game week 8, Liverpool have, as I mentioned, Chelsea. They've also got City, Arsenal, and Brighton in they're the 4 fixtures in a row, and that's going to be really interesting, I think, to see who's brave enough, or whether it is brave or stupid to go without any of them at that point. I'm obviously talking specifically about Salah and Trent, who are the 2 that we generally would suggest you keep for the whole season, but that'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
See what happens around that point.
And Irons makes a good point in the chat there. Thanks for joining us. Do you see yourself more likely to take punts game week 9 to 16 as we have the unlimited World Cup transfers? So I suppose you could apply that now as well. If you are planning to wildcard in game week 8 or 9, is it more viable to bring in a player like Perisic? Because if it does go wrong, or another player, that you can obviously fix that very quickly. And I think that is a decent point. I think when you have an out, a guaranteed out, and you're not going to cause yourself -4s and structure issues, I do think there is a little bit more of an impetus to bring in players that you're less confident on in certain areas. So basically minutes, I would say, because I don't think you bring in a player just because you've got a gut feel. If they're a good player with good stats and the main concern is you're not sure if they're going to play, then I think there is opportunity there to potentially be above the crowd and say, well, I do think this player is going to get the minutes in these 2 weeks, and people will be put off as a result. Perisic is the classic example from this week, I would say.
Yeah, it's the players that would potentially be a long-term problem in your team, isn't it? But they have potentially short, high upside. But yeah, that long-term doesn't exist when you've got that wild card.
Or even a player who say the main player's injured and a backup player's come in. So I don't know. Rodrigo is maybe a good example. We're not sure of his first choice for Leeds, but it certainly appears like he is at the moment. If you're worried that he's going to drop out because Bamford is going to come back in up front, and Sinistra is going to take his position, then you probably wouldn't go with Rodrigo. I personally wouldn't. But now I think there's an argument where you could say, well, I am going to do it because I'm going to ride it for 3 or 4 weeks, and as soon as there's a problem, I'll just hit the wild card if I need to. Or even if a lot of us might have 2 free transfers at that point when it becomes a problem anyway, the way it's going. So I do think there is more scope to do it. The fact that we've got a lot of the 4 million defenders like Nico Williams, Emerson, who's gone to West Ham now, I assume he's going to get into the team at some point. And then obviously you've got the Everton guy, Patterson. You've got Pereira at 4.5 as well. We have got a lot of players on the bench where I wouldn't be too worried about them even coming in as well. So it just seems like a perfect blend. It seems like we've not really had this amount of cheap players that are viable, but then we're not actually needed because the whole of every player is cheap from the top teams. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like these would be gifts in other seasons, but they're not particularly gifts this time.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. Yeah, I think it's also just a big thing about just how much value the defence is, and that was a trend from last year, wasn't it? That we now see and a lot of those players you've talked about there are those players that are good cheap players, or often midfielders or strikers that are a similar price to defenders that are just so reliable in the big teams, and we can afford them all. So I think, yeah, so it's definitely interesting. I hadn't thought about your point there actually about not only what Ian said about punting later on near to the World Cup, but even now that's the case to more of an extent than normal.
Definitely feels like it. It seems like it's more focused between short-term gains, doesn't it? Because of the way it's broke up. But we still play the long game because we don't know what's going to emerge. I think that's always the general advice, like why people are in a position where they don't have free transfers to use, because they've looked at a scope of sort of 7 to 8 game weeks and it's worked out okay. That's fine. I think you can throw the odd one in there. I do think that is possible now. We're going to look at some minutes for key. It's under the title here of minutes for key players for us, but really it's just talking about some of the top teams and obviously the concerns in the community. That's what we aim to do, is look at what the hot topics are, and that certainly seems to be the case that the best teams, City, Liverpool, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, they are going to be playing games every 3 days pretty much from this point onwards, because the Champions League has to be done at least until the World Cup. And our teams are littered with these players. So is it going to cause us issues? We're starting just looking at City, and we already have some quotes from Guardiola saying that Haaland's basically not going to play all the games. He's not going to start them when they have games every 3 days. So yeah, we've got concerns straight away, because I think a lot of us have actually got Haaland in our team. Do you have a read on when he might look to rest him? I mean, we're taking him on his word at the moment as well. He might not rest him, I suppose, but
yeah, I think he probably will rest him. Yeah, that would be in terms of not get a start. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 3 he's on the bench for one of them, just because Guardiola specifically mentioned it. And even if we don't see that, I think we'll see 3 earlier subs than normal. But yeah, I've actually considered even selling Haaland this week for Kane, because of the reason I mentioned before about how I need that extra 0.1 to upgrade someone, and I'm trying to find somewhere to do that on my team, and that's an obvious way to do it, where I'm potentially getting ahead of other people. I don't think I'll do it because of Haaland's fixture this week and just how good he is. But I think it's viable to the extent that I've actually considered it this week, and I think it will be really popular after this game week if we see Haaland play a lot of minutes. And then particularly if there's comments again from Guardiola. I think you probably, I don't know, I honestly think I feel like it's guesswork. I would get, if I had to guess, maybe the midweek one would probably be the one I would guess.
Yeah.
Because I think you've then got a 2-day gap until the weekend game. So he's rested for the weekend, which I think is Villa, which you might consider to be more difficult than the midweek fixture, which is, I can't remember off the top of my head. Forest, yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be my guess, I guess, but
I think if you want to play truly safe, then Review does actually have Kane as only 0.2, so 6.5 for Haaland for expected points this week, 6.7 for Kane, so 0.2 above. Over the entire period up to game week 8, Haaland's 28 points at the moment, Kane's 29.7, and obviously that changes, so gaining 1.7 points by making the transfer at some stage. I think the main issue with the transfer this week is, if Haaland does start versus Forest, his expected points are very, very high. So it's the immediate burn that you might get on that is the worry. I think after that is fine. I think from game week 6, Kane's a lot better in game week 6 fixture anyway. 2 points difference. Just my thoughts on the Haaland rotation. I do think it will probably happen, and I do think he'll probably come off the bench even when he is rested, because we were talking about it before we went live. I don't think it's just Pep, but Pep especially, and you saw it in the friendly that just happened. He does talk about momentum, rhythm a lot, and especially in the early season, there's no need to rest players, and he doesn't rest players for rest players' sake. And I do agree with what he says. Most of the time when he changes a player, it is a tactical reason. Usually when he has rested players, it is the game before the Champions League tie. That is the pattern that clearly happened last season. If people want to go back and look, you will see players dropped, not just for a tactical reason. In my mind, they were rested. But the caveat to that is the game before the Champions League was very, very often a home game versus an easy side. It just fell that way all the time. It was always like a home to Everton or something before the Champions League, so he had more scope to do so. I mean, if you look to the fixtures, you'd say Forest is more likely that he would rest players compared to the Villa game. I know Villa are all over the place at the moment, but away to Villa is not as easy a fixture on paper as it is versus Forest, right? No. But the fact that Villa is the game before the Champions League makes me think that that is still, with the information we've got, the most likely game that he would rest. And it's similar time between them. I think the draws happen today. Their group's quite tough. I'm not sure of the day. I think it might be Wednesday that he would play on the Champions League rather than the Tuesday, which gives 3 days the other way as well. Not 100% on that, but I think that is what's likely to happen. So for me, my read at the moment is it's probably going to be Villa, but with that caveat of the fixture makes sense for Forest. So I think that one of those two games he is going to miss. I don't think that's groundbreaking. I think everyone probably thinks that. It's going to be one of those two. At the moment, I would say it's more likely Villa. But it's a big risk. If you just want to avoid the risk, and considering Kane's expected points are very, very similar, then the obvious answer is we just go to Kane, because you can't be... I know he's also in a position where he's playing games every 3 days, but with the information we've got so far, you wouldn't have thought that he'll miss the game, would you?
No, you definitely wouldn't have thought he'd miss the game. I wonder if, like, actually after this game week, if it becomes a trend, but you actually see people who have 2 transfers downgrade Haaland to someone like Tony, and then upgrade a midfielder to Son, I don't know, or put that money elsewhere, or to De Bruyne if they feel like there's way more chance that he plays. I honestly think at this stage it's way more likely to just be tactical as well, depending on the opposition, the way they're set up, what Pep thinks is best. Whereas later in the season, when you have and it's going to happen not even later in the season actually, but within a couple of months this season because of the congestive fixture period, there'll be periods where players are so fatigued they just can't play. In theory they could, but they'll just be withdrawn just to manage their load. Whereas I think at this point that's unlikely. The only caveat with Haaland is we know that's one of the main reasons that he joined City was to have that managed, but it's more that they're doing that in anticipation of a problem, rather than it being reactionary. Would be my guess on that.
I completely agree. I think early on the top teams in general for most of the players are not going to rotate for rotate's sake. I mean, City will rotate tactically as they always had, and maybe Haaland is a special case because he's mentioned him, but I don't think he's going to purposely play weak players. That comes later, like you said. I think Champions League, semi-final, around there, depending on the state of the league, you're going to see that sort of thing happen. I don't think you're going to see rest for rest's sake from Pep. And then some of the other teams, we look down to Liverpool. They don't really seem to have an option at the moment. I think their bench is, thin as a result of all their injuries. They're playing every 3 days. I can't see them anywhere they particularly rest. I think the concern is Tsimikas has been coming on for Robertson. Part of me thinks, but when you look at Liverpool's bench, they don't really have any other options. So what other options has Klopp actually had to impact the game? Tsimikas is a player that can impact the game, even though he was dreadful when he's come on. He potentially could do. So part of me feels like that's why he's been making that sub. He hasn't really had any other options. I think also that was partially driven by the fact that Liverpool got a red card. Robertson making those driving runs, he can't make those runs anymore, so why not get the ball in early, save someone having to run and leave the space at left back. I think that was partly to do with it as well. He puts the ball in early, Tsimikas. But I think that's one area where Robertson maybe could be looking at, because he is the go-to player on their bench at the moment, outside Carvalho maybe, who's also a kid and not proven for the Liverpool team yet. So that's going to change though, right, when Jota and Nunes come back in a few more weeks. So do you think that is going to have an impact? I suppose it will to certain players, but it's hard to judge now, I think, where that will have the impact. Yeah,
I don't think it's going to have like you said, I don't think it'll have an immediate impact in the next few weeks. I don't think we should be worried about rotation with that team. I can hear your cat meowing.
Oh no, how annoying. Literally come and sat next to me and started meowing. Cheers, Penguin.
Penguin, is your cat called Penguin?
My cat's called Penguin because my kids named it, and it's not even black and white. It was after Batman villains.
Yeah, love that. Absolute jokers.
Nice one.
What was I saying now? What was I talking about?
Jota and Nunes, are they going to affect it?
Yeah. I'll just back up what you said about Robertson. I'd be extremely, extremely surprised if we see him suddenly dropped. But don't be surprised if Tsimikas eats into his minutes more, just with coming on as a sub. With Jota and Nunes, I think they're immediate. Threats to Diaz's minutes in particular, and Firmino's definitely. And I wouldn't be surprised if Firmino is just like straight out of their favoured 11 either, even though we saw him start. In fact, no, we didn't even see him start the Community Shield, did we, when Jota was around? Jota was injured before the Community Shields. So I wouldn't even be surprised if Jota's just first choice in that front three with Diaz and Salah, with Jota playing centrally. And Sorry, Nunes playing century and Jota's in general can rotate with the other two. So yeah, but I just don't think it's a concern right now. It just probably will be in a few weeks.
Yeah, Liverpool don't really have the options at the moment. I think Spurs, the wing backs are obvious. Conte has done it previously. It's a very demanding position in that team. Perisic is the obvious one. I mean, one of the games I was lucky enough to watch was Spurs versus Wolves. I say lucky. The first half was dreadful from Spurs. I thought Wolves were pretty impressive. But something that was clear to me and anyone watching, I think, is that Emerson Royal is not the answer at right wing back for me. The attacks just go there to die. They so many times he just kills the attack. But he's been using him ahead of Doherty, which I guess it must only be a fitness thing. But maybe he just likes him because he's better defensively, which he is. I wouldn't be surprised if Doherty gets back in that team pretty shortly. And given that price he's dropped. I think he's 4.8 or maybe even 4.7. I think
4.7 now.
Is he
4.7 now?
That is a ridiculous price if he ever does nail down. I just don't know whether he ever will. But he might be one where if we get a leak, because I think we've been getting quite clear leaks with Spurs at the moment, because Paul O'Keefe is a name on Twitter. If you guys don't know, have a look at him. He's been doing his predicted 11s. They've been bang on. So I think he just has access to their training, I think, and sees which groups they're training in. So if you see Doherty in the 11 and you're struggling with going back to what we said at the beginning, you've got 2 free transfers, you don't know where to even use them, then I think he could be a cheeky one to bring in potentially, similar to Perisic. It's just the worry is that going to then impact you next week if you do get injuries and stuff and suddenly you're in a position. But yeah, I think the wing backs for Spurs will rotate, and the other option is Richarlison, isn't it? I think Richarlison has been coming on for Son. Son was, I think, first or second most sub player last season. He was obviously still fantastic, so is that even matter for him? But Richarlison predominantly plays on the left-hand side of a front three. He has played on the right occasionally, and he obviously can play up front as well. But it seems like Son's the person he's going to impact most. So, yeah, I don't know whether Son is obviously always an option because he's a good player. But I talked about at the beginning of the season. I think given his price and the other options in Salah and stuff, I just don't really see him as a viable pick necessarily. That doesn't mean he can't. I mean, he could easily score 2 or 3 goals, and I don't care that he's been playing poorly. I think that can change in a heartbeat because he has been playing poorly when I watched him. I just don't see him as a viable option personally.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think, and in terms of on the wing backs as well, I know you nearly bought him in this week, and he did really well for people who did buy him in. I really don't like Perisic as a pick. It's just a minutes thing. If you look at his minutes, something we covered in pre-season, but his minutes when he's played for Conte in the past are so minimal. And because of the 5 subs, I think so often when he doesn't play, he comes off the bench. And some people might view that as a good thing because he can do so much in 20 minutes or so. But actually, like he did that recently. Like he came off the bench, got an assist from a corner. But in general, you just do not want players that are coming off the bench regularly. I think that's going to happen regularly with Perisic. Even if he's coming on for 20 minutes, half an hour, there's plenty of players you'd rather have that are guaranteed to be playing 90 minutes or starting every game week, in my opinion. So I think it's an interesting one because I think it's actually, even if you look within like the analytics community, that's one that definitely divides people.
Well, I think they like him.
Risk versus reward, isn't it?
Yeah, they like him if his minutes was high, but because they're not, they just don't like him. That's the general vibe
exactly.
I get, which I can completely understand. But that goes counter to what I like to do. I like to find these players that people don't want to touch, but are potentially game breaking if you can get their minutes. But if he's not going to get the minutes, he's just going to cause you more headaches, isn't he? It's so frustrating because the fact that the Conte says he's clearly bought him. I think he's levels above Sessegnon, and I do think he'll start the majority of games personally. But I'm in the minority view there. I think so. I have to take that on board, don't I?
Yeah, I think he probably starts like half of games, maybe 60%, something like that would be my guess right now. If you look at the whole season, but yeah, like you said, if you can get him at the right time and that's your play style, that's great. And that's why you see even those different play styles within people that use analytics. Some people will just. We know he's a good pick when he plays. Is your read on how much he plays and whether you can get him at the right time when he does play. That's key, isn't it? And I think he's an interesting option.
It's just the whole package with him. The fact that he takes corners as a defender means that he's already very likely to get a bonus in any game that he plays. Really, especially if they keep a clean sheet. Obviously, a good defence, and we know offensively he is a bit of a monster. I mean, his crossing's ridiculous. He could score 7 or 8 goals. So he's extremely appealing, but over this period, it just is a massive danger, isn't it? And there's other viable options. I think that's the general point. I know they didn't do well this week, but there are lots of other viable options, aren't there? So, I suppose I have to continue to be sensible through gritted teeth on that one, I think.
Yeah, and for me, it's like I said, it's purely a minutes thing for me. If we knew who was starting every week, his value should probably be like 7, I guess, relative to the other defenders, same as Robertson. Maybe, yeah. So he's definitely, it's just minutes. I don't think when he's on the pitch, he's brilliant.
Yeah, I think he is. Arsenal are the next team we're going to talk about. So have they made a single change to their 11? I don't think they have so far. I think it's been the same. Someone in the chat can correct me if that's wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's been the same 11 consistently. They have got players like Nketiah, Smith Rowe, who are options. With the games every 3 days, do we see him mixing it up, or is it? Arteta's very much from that Pep school of thought, isn't he? I feel like when the team's working, the rhythm, momentum, I can't really see them any need to just these players needing rests already, given their age profile and everything as well. I don't think he just drops a player.
Yeah, we saw it. Yeah, we talked about it before. Like we saw it at the end of last season, and particularly with the attackers, I can't see that changing until it needs to. Yeah, with midweek games, personally, particularly because they're playing so ridiculously well at the moment. I don't think Smith Rowe, who's I think now ready to go, and Nketiah are suddenly threats to their minutes. It's just they could be long. It's just that long term will be interesting to see which player it is that they're a threat to. So Smith Rowe, like when he comes in, is he going to come in more in Ødegaard's role? Is he going to come in for I don't know, Martinelli and then Jesus plays on the wing, or for Saka and Jesus plays on the wing? I think that'd be interesting to see. But for now, I don't think they're a threat. But I think the defence is interesting because you've obviously got Ben White currently playing right back. And then but Tomiyasu is now fully fit, I believe. And so if he does come in, which I think Tomiyasu he is their first choice right back. Whether Ben White's been good enough there for that to change long term, I doubt it. And it'll just be interesting to see if he does come in there, whether White or Saliba, which one it is that gets dropped. I'm pretty sure Gabriel is their main nailed centre back. Saliba started really well.
He's left-footed, isn't he?
Last year. Yes, yeah, of course. So he'll play left-sided centre back. So it's which one of those two? It's quite an interesting thing, I think.
I think there's a chance. Fans seem to think that Gabriel might have a chance of slipping out. I personally don't see that. I think Gabriel's been pretty impressive ever since he came to Arsenal overall. I know Ben White has been as well. Saliba's looked great and is the kid. I don't think it's one you can confidently say each way, but I go back to the fact that while it's not broken, I think it will stay that way. I don't think Tomiyasu was a decent. He came in and he did a decent job, and obviously the way they set up with Tierney being the bombing left back, and then you had Tomiyasu almost Walker-esque tucking in, worked fairly well for them. But Ben White can also do that job. I know some fans have sort of criticised that right back is not the best. I think if anything, it would just be Tomiyasu for White the way it goes, or just stays the same. I feel like it's more likely to stay the same until it becomes a clear problem for them, which at the moment doesn't seem to be. It's in these early days anyway. I think we come back to the fact that we're talking about starts. A player's going to start coming off because they're playing games every 3 days. I think that with the 5 subs and everything, yes, that's more likely to happen. But how are we going to avoid that? I don't think you really can. I don't think you can go to the point where you start picking objectively worse players because they get 90 minutes over a player who maybe gets 70 minutes. I think struggle.
I think you can, but only later in the season where there's a trend, and if it's a defender who's getting subbed around about 60 minutes. Suddenly they become really unattractive if they're being subbed 55 minutes one game, 70 the next. So I think that's probably the main, or even an attacker, I guess, if they're consistently being subbed off really early. Yeah. Then obviously that changes thinking, but I don't think we know that at this point, like you said.
No, it's always going to come down to the individual players. So I'll retract that a bit. I mean, someone like Dunk, for example, 4.5 million, can't see any reason why he'd be getting subbed. There are options to go there, and they're not particularly worse options. So I think that's fine. But I think if you are literally just bringing in a player because you think they're going to get 90 minutes, essentially, it's just it's not really the answer for me. I think trusting these guys early on. I think the rotation in general is over-egged early on, and I think if anything, you're just going to see more subs off, which for defenders you could argue is a good thing in some cases. You might get lucky off the back of keeping a clean sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Arsenal stays the same as they are generally for now, and I don't think it's anything to worry about. I think Chelsea are a decent topic of conversation, given we have seen this a lot from Chelsea recently, back end of last season as well, where they just seem to, fall apart. Just ship loads of goals suddenly. They go from looking incredibly good to incredibly poor very, very quickly. Kante and Kovacic being out probably has a big impact. I think Kovacic is just, he's their best centre midfielder for me, and when he's out, it's a big notice. And Kante, as soon as he's injured, it's happened. Could just be happenstance. It's one game, and Kante wasn't fully at the races. But I think when Kante is bang on song and Kovacic, that is a world class centre midfield pairing there, and they lose that. We see for most of the top teams have got, especially in City's case, and Liverpool, when they've got Thiago and Fabinho in full form, they control the game, right, in some way, shape or form, and usually that's via midfielders that can actually hold on to the ball. Man United have had that issue for ages. It's not always the case, granted, but I feel like when Chelsea lose those two, it's a big impact. And do you think that's going to have a negative effect? I mean, I've got double Chelsea defence. The fixtures are great, and we're talking about rotation in general, but just a general point on Chelsea, do you think they're viable options? Because people are really frustrated with Mount. Like, there's all sorts of issues seems to be going on there. Have they even scored a goal yet?
I think they're definitely viable options in defence. Yeah, I think just because it's been a tricky first 3 game weeks. I think generally they're a viable option in defence. We know that from how good their defence was last year. It's just that there's uncertainty because they're probably still even now probably going to sign another centre back, like Fofana. I think they're trying to sign, aren't they? And even like there's talk of if they don't get Fofana, they're going to bid for like even Harry Maguire or something mad like that. So they clearly want another centre back. So that'll probably improve things. But yeah, like people were literally last game week, Cucurella was a really popular transfer, and I don't think one game week changes that he was a good option then, personally, unless you think there's more chance he keeps playing at centre back, because I guess Koulibaly is now out of the next game, isn't he?
Yeah, he's
so
out
that's just for one game week if he does end up playing there. So I still think Chelsea's defence is good, but I still think Mount is a really good option, and people shouldn't be like selling him now, particularly before their next fixture. Yeah, it's just so like what's happened so far is just 3 game weeks, and it kind of goes back to that. I think basically,
yeah, Leicester and Southampton next 3 game weeks. I mean, what can you take from it? He hasn't looked great. Chelsea's attack hasn't looked good. He's got Leicester and Southampton next up.
Yeah, and so often, as we said, when we talk about form, it happens to coincide with really good fixtures. In 2 game weeks, we could talk about people buying Mount because he's on form. I really kind of want their attack to do well because I want it to be more exciting, and I want Sterling to be an option. But we'll see. Yeah, but I think like defensively, I think they'd like even though they conceded a lot in their first 3 games. Well, they'd clean sheet game week 1, didn't they, against Everton, but then conceded 3 against Leeds, and then I'm just checking now, 3 against Leeds, and then 2 against Spurs. Like, I still think their defence is good. Yeah,
I mean the numbers are still decent for Chelsea. They are. So over a long period, anyway, certainly. And the main players everyone's got is James and Cucurella. I think that's the main 2 options people have got from Chelsea out in the defence, anyway. I don't really have any concerns there. The Koulibaly red card probably helps Cucurella. Probably going to play left centre back, I imagine, because they don't have many options. I do think Cucurella is one of those. He's obviously incredibly. I don't think anyone knows the answer. Tuchel rotates a hell of a lot, or he has in the past. When the game's every 3 days, it's a position he does rotate, and we've not seen him in this team, with the options that he's got. So I don't think anyone can categorically say the issue there. But I do feel like, given that Chilwell is good enough when he's fit enough, that potentially is a problem. But it's that back to that short term thing. I think Cucurella is still a good short term option, and then later on you can maybe sell him for someone else. So it's not a massive issue right now. Some of the set pieces, I noticed that he sort of came off the set pieces. I think Mount started taking them from both sides, which is another positive for Mount, I guess. And James playing right centre back's not ideal. But I think if you react to what happens with Chelsea on any given game week, you end up in trouble because they can change it all around the next week. Loftus-Cheek playing at right wing back failed. Then next week it could be James at right wing back, and he's suddenly one of the best picks in the game again straight away. And if you keep reacting, you end up in trouble. So I think generally just sticking with them for now is again the viable option for me, and I think it's the best play at the moment. See what happens.
Yeah, I'm with you. I guess just like we've only been, well, say the big six. We've been through 5 teams there. We've not the only team in the big six with quotation marks we've not covered is Man United because not many people own players from them. But again, that's just because that's the way the game is at the moment. We all own players from those teams, don't we? So apologise if we've not mentioned the team you support, but we're trying to keep it as relevant as we can to what FPL's like at the moment.
Absolutely. I'm just going to bring up some slides here as well. This is from at 11 feet on Twitter as part of the analytics community. If you don't follow him, then I recommend doing so. He puts out loads of good stuff. So he's given us this slide here, which is projected clean sheets across from game week 4 to game week 9. So looking to probably wildcard around that time, or just generally looking at the next, how many is that? 5 game weeks? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, 6 game weeks. And lo and behold, right at the top, we've got Manchester City. Obvious reasons, projected clean sheets is the highest. Liverpool, Chelsea. If you're in the pod, then I recommend going to the YouTube just to look at this rather than we have to read it out. But we've got Man City right at the top, projected around 3 clean sheets out of 6, 50%. Liverpool just below that, 2.79. Chelsea, 2.37. And then Arsenal, 2.06. We've got Brighton right up there as well, 2.01.
That's value, that, isn't it?
It is, and I think with the Tottenham's fixtures after this week are a little bit iffy for a few games, so that's why they've dropped down, and Brentford are right up there as well. So it's just more of the same, isn't it? It's not like people didn't know this. Man City, Liverpool, the defence has not been great so far, but the numbers suggest that Liverpool are still good for clean sheets, and I don't see any reason to react to that. And I'm going to keep with my Man City, Liverpool, Chelsea and Arsenal defence, which is exclusively what I've got. So yeah, happy.
Right, yeah, keep it simple. I think that one of the main takeaways from there is just Brighton. We saw last season, in terms of underlying data, they were the 5th or 6th, depending whether you look at goals conceded or XG conceded, 5th or 6th best team in the whole league, and they're 5th on that table for the next 6 game weeks, and they've got assets at 4.5 in Sanchez and Dunk, and others as well, who you can probably get, and that times up perfectly to when you might wildcard. So I think investing in a Brighton defender is really, really good value.
Yeah, I think for me, if I could change anything now, I probably would drop Ederson to Sanchez, given the way he's performed, and just the fact that Brighton are still so high on this list, to give me that million if I wanted to, and free up that Man City spot. I think that would be useful.
As in, you'd consider that with a transfer if you had 2 and just wanted to burn 1 this week.
Yeah, I suppose so. I suppose I would consider it. I've not. Yeah, I think Man City at home to Palace. It's still not a game I'd want to lose Ederson for, even though it seems like Zaha's perfect to counter on at the moment. But I think that long term, structurally, to free up that million and that Man City spot, now we've got maybe Gundogan's the obvious pick here, right? He's starting games, which is pretty much good enough for him to be a viable option at that price, and given his role. So maybe I want to move to that position if he does end up nailing down the minutes, and therefore I think switching Ederson to Sanchez is not a massive loss. So yeah, that's an option for me moving forward. I think I'm going to bring up his other slide here, which is goals. So this is goals over the next 6 weeks, and you won't be surprised to hear that the familiar names are right at the top. So Man City projected to score 15.55 goals over the next 6 weeks. We've got Liverpool in second, 13.73. Arsenal in third, 11.10. Spurs 10.84 in fourth, and Chelsea 10.65 in fifth. We've then got Man United, Brentford, Villa, Leeds. So again, the same players that most of us have got in our team. Man City attackers, Liverpool attackers, Arsenal attackers, and Spurs. There's no reason to move any of these guys on yet, is there? Until the minutes become a problem, if it even is a thing.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
It's hard doing content in these times. Sorry, guys. I'll try to spice it up for you and throw something in, but I think the play is just to chill, isn't it, for now?
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to try and say something for the sake of it. Yeah.
Absolutely not. Okay. Shall we move on to looking at some midfield enablers? Because that's what we say, enablers, but sort of 5. I think it's sort of 5 to 6.5 we've looked at. It might be a slot in the team that we want to utilise in order to get all these other guys, and it might be the only spot that is kind of interchangeable at the moment for most people. So we're going to bring up a slide here. It's on the screen. You can talk us through it, Sam.
Yep. So basically what I've got here is players that we've picked out that are priced between and 6.5, just because that's an area that we know a lot of people are considering at the moment. Because they're either switching from Neto, for example, or from Bailey, or maybe looking to downgrade to upgrade elsewhere. So there's a lot of talk about them. We've just picked one from each team. We tried to pick what we think is the best option within each team. We've excluded. I think Martinelli would actually fit into this price bracket. He's not on this list just because we would just say you just need to buy him. He's that good an option. But I think these are the players that some people might be considering. So we've got their price, that their XG per 90 and expected assists per 90 from last season. So long-term data. All of these players, I believe, played in the Premier League last season. And then their XG and XA per 90 this season, which is obviously an extremely small sample size. And the predicted points on the right there is the massive data predicted points from FPL Review's website. So they're in order of price there. That's the order. And I think it's interesting. I think it's probably best if we just talk through them one by one, Luke. For me, firstly, on Ødegaard, I think is an interesting one because, and for most people, not viable just because we already own 3 Arsenal.
Yeah.
And even in general, I don't particularly like him as a pick. To be honest, if you look at his long-term data as well, like it's not, considering his price, I don't think it's really that great. If you look at the data of some of the other players.
I think it's okay. It's Martinelli, isn't it? Martinelli kind of kills him in the 3 Arsenal. That's the main thing, isn't it? His expected minutes are very high, and they have very good fixtures. So
yeah, like it's okay. Yeah, but I think about like 6.4. Meh. Like I personally, I didn't really like him as a pick last year. But yeah, if you've seen something the way he's playing and you think it's changing, then fair enough. But he seems to be playing a similar role to me. The whole team's just playing better. But yeah, for most people, not viable, I guess, because of the other Arsenal options. I would imagine with Jesus, Martinelli, and then most people have Saka or a defender. Do you have any other particular thoughts on him, Luke?
No. I think he's a fine pick. You know, he's highest out of all this bunch if you've got that amount of money. But I think given it's also about value, right? The fact he's got 19.3 points here is great, but he costs 6.4 million, which is a sizable amount compared to some of the other options. And it's part of the meta strategy, isn't it, where you have to also consider your options from that team. So I wouldn't include him in the top 3 options from Arsenal. So therefore, he wouldn't be a pick that I'd go for. But I do like the second one that I mentioned already, which is Rodrigo, because although he is also at the higher end of this price list, the fact that he's on penalties, up front for Leeds whilst Bamford's out at least, just make him a really appealing option. I think he's massively overperformed so far in these 3 game weeks. I mean, one of his goals was literally on the goal line, wasn't it? Which has made his XG jump right up. You can see historically, it's fine, 0.19 and 0.18, combined. That's not terrible for the price at all. But really, the most important column is the predicted points, 17.9. If you're sat with someone like Neto in your team, and you have got a spare million, then you can see that you're expected to score around 2 extra points. So to me, given the stage of the season that we're in, that's a sizable enough amount to think about that transfer at some point.
It's a perfect example again of what you mentioned before. In fact, I think you even mentioned his name of someone you might go for now because short term is a good option. But we know that Bamford will probably come in, and also Sinistera is a threat to his minutes as well. But if that starts to happen in a few weeks, it might be when you're wildcarding anyway. So I think it comes down to that as well. And as you can see, this is all per 90. So per 90, his underlying data was really good last season. He just didn't have consistent minutes. Really good for his price. And so if he can get close to that again, obviously it's like you said, it's inflated at the moment because of that one chance. I think he's a good option for the coming game weeks because of the fixtures, but he might be one actually for the game week after next because they're playing Brighton next.
Tough game and then some nice games. So
yeah, and if you like, I wouldn't. If you've got 2 free transfers and you need to use one, I would just do it now.
Apparently, he's rising in price tonight again. So
okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not overly keen on him long term, but I think short term is absolutely fine. And I just think people need to be wary that he has overperformed so far in these 3 game weeks. A midfielder playing up front is always going to be appealing in FPL anyway. And then you add penalties onto that and a team with good fixtures, nice price. You can't argue with it. I just think that he's not necessarily a world beater, but it's a great run. I think a great time to pick him. Obviously, a better time would be at the beginning of the season when he scored a load of points, but it is what it is. Rashford comes next, 6.3 million as well. Data last season was poor when I looked at him, and that's why I couldn't understand why people were going with him. I think it was less than Langa per 90.
Yeah.
But 17.2 points, obviously scored. Again, had a few chances so far this season. I don't know if Anthony's signing, or even if he does, I suppose it won't affect things for a little while. So what are we saying on him?
It's just Ronaldo as well, isn't it? Ultimately, like how long can he not start Ronaldo?
I don't know. After this week, the fact that they beat Liverpool,
and he started him and they lost 4-0 to Brentford. So I found that situation quite amusing because Ronaldo's tried to move away and just can't find the moves. It's just like amusing. I mean, like it's just interesting because you've got a player who's one of the best players of all time with this huge ego, and suddenly they've beaten the best team in the league, one of the best teams in the world, without him. And so presumably Rashford's going to keep playing there, but you kind of think, oh, how long can that go on for? And I suppose the reason I put him in this list, I've not seen many people consider him, is we know Rashford, I think 3 seasons ago, he scored 17 league goals in a season. So I don't think you can ignore a player like that if they start to play regularly and start to score goals again. Even though he was really poor last year, if suddenly Man United start to play well, he's a player people will consider, which is why I put him in this list.
Heckin News says, would you rather pay 6 million for Harrison? We picked these players just because I think they're the best option from that particular team. Jack Harrison I looked at, and from FBref, 365 days data, non-penalty XG plus XA was 0.25, which was less than Rodrigo's. If you combine those, you can see that up there. So I think given there is a price difference, so fair enough. And like I said, I do think Rodrigo has overperformed, but I think Harrison historical data is not good enough where I'd consider him over Rodrigo. I know he's also playing very well at the moment. It's similar players compared to I looked at. Number one was Jordan Ayew straight away, which tickled me. Anthony Gordon's up there, Dwight McNeil. I don't really see the appeal of Harrison particularly over Rodrigo at this point. I think if it was long term, like we mentioned, you weren't doing it, then I would pick Harrison over Rodrigo simply because of the minutes thing. But Sinestra is an interesting one because he has predominantly played on the left side. He is a left winger. I think the view from Leeds fans is he will eventually play on the right hand side because Aronson is much better in the centre. So you'll have Aronson in the number 10 role, Harrison on the left, Sinestra on the right, and Bamford up top, with Rodrigo either dropped or competing with Bamford when he's inevitably injured. Yeah. But there isn't really any direct evidence would say that is definitely going to be the case. It just seems to be the feel, right? And I think I support that. So Harrison minutes wise makes sense. The only reason I mention that is because obviously Sinestra could just come in on the left and replace Harrison, so maybe his minutes aren't as good as I expect. But that's why we've left him off of this list. But he is an option, and it's not much worse than a lot of the other people. We just didn't want to fill up the screen with every option, because I think from especially Brighton and Leeds there are quite a few viable options here. And similarly, that's why we've picked Pascal Grob right over the likes of McAllister.
And as well, Trossard as well. Like Trossard's also a good option. I think he's just about 0.7 or 0.8, something like that, more expensive than Gross. Their underlying data from last season is actually really, really similar. It's basically just reversed. So Trossard has more goal threat. Gross is slightly more assist threat, which is why he's slightly more expensive, I guess. So I think they're both good options. So if you've seen something that makes you want to go Trossard over him, and you've got the money to do it, and you know last season he had a bigger goal threat, then I think Trossard's also a good pick. But I think Gross, again, because of what we've mentioned as well around Brighton's fixtures, particularly at this time, I think he's a nice little option.
Yeah, with him, it's always been minutes. We've seen how good he can be as an option. It's just being in a Brighton team where he's not always had the most amount of minutes. I think Wee Rose, another name on Twitter, said something like he had 57 minutes per squad, which is basically a metric he uses where when he's been available, how often or how many minutes has he played, rather than just general minutes over seasons. He's actually used it depending on when he's available to actually play within that squad. So it's relatively low, but we have seen that he has had fantastic seasons. He's playing in this advanced role, taking some set pieces. The hope was he had penalties. It looks like McAllister's taken them. But when I compared the data between McAllister, Grob and Trossard, Grob was marginally better. I think Trossard, the fact that he leans more on goals, like you've mentioned, is his 0.34 combined, but it's slightly more on goals. He's definitely an option as well. I think the fact they've signed a left wing back who may be integrated into the team puts a little bit of doubt around Trossard in terms of where he's going to play. It may mean that he plays further forward and his data improves. It doesn't necessarily mean that, right? Just because you play further forward doesn't mean that it will. So for now, I kind of like Grob the most while he's in the team at least. But yeah, like you say, Trossard's very comparable, and I think those two are standout. McAllister with penalties is fine and he's playing well, but his long-term data is not good enough for me to suddenly think he's made that massive jump straight away.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to call you out on you calling him Grob, Luke.
Grob, yeah, I know the fake B.
Gross.
Yeah.
It's like calling Trossard Trobard or something like that.
He's Trobard. Yeah, I see a lot of people refer to him as Pascal Grob, but yeah, Gross.
Okay, maybe I'm missing something. And yeah, I think Eze is a funny one. He's like one where, for me personally, like as a football fan who like saw him play in the Championship, he's unbelievable. And actually, his game on the weekend was particularly like unbelievable. If you look at his data for like pass completion, dribbles, etc. And if you just watch the game, he was amazing. Apparently, I could see it even just from the highlights. But he's probably an example of a player where it's probably actually quite helpful to look at the data, in terms of as an FPL pick, because maybe there's a chance. And I'm talking for FPL here, that he might flatter to deceive, because he's so good at dribbling, for example, so great on the eye. Maybe he's the kind of player where he's a great footballer, but maybe won't be a great FPL asset. Maybe that's what we're seeing But I hope we see him become a really good option. But I just think out of the ones we've got here, and it's reflected in his predicted points there as well. He's not an option for now, I don't think. But
no.
it'd be great to see him become an option, I think, because he's such a great player to watch.
Absolutely.
And just after he had that horrendous injury as well, it's really great to just see him playing again.
Yeah, I think their team, it's been spoken about a lot, but if Elise, all these players can get on the pitch at the same time somehow, that's extremely exciting. And it's really from game week 10 that Palace have got that run. People are just going to go to Zaha for obvious reasons, but maybe at that point we'll have 10 weeks of data, which again is not ideal, but it's better than 3 weeks of data. So hopefully Eze can have shown a little bit more, and maybe people will look to him as a bit of an enabler. The team structure is going to be different at that point, I think. Like we've mentioned, I think some of the forwards are going to be more viable. Mitrovic, Solanke, other people. So it might be the makeup of our team is slightly different, and we do have to think about him. Gray's on here, 5.5 million. He's the next one down at 15. He's actually got more projected points than Eze, but same price, 15.7 points. I think people bought him in last week because he was suggested on review as well, and he scored straight away. He's not got a massive history of scoring goals, but he is a nice option just because they've got nice fixtures at the end of the day, haven't they? And I think I think he's more than viable pick as well. I think even though Neto's at 15.8 there, 15.7, I think the fixtures are probably better on Gray's side. And there's some speculation around Neto maybe going to Arsenal at this moment. I don't think that would maybe mean that he drops out of the team, but I think he could just switch at any point. I don't know if you've seen, but Pepe's actually gone out on loan, I think, today as well. I think I saw.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah, which almost, considering he's the main backup for Saka on that side, suggests to me that they are confident of bringing someone in. Maybe that is Neto. So.
Yeah. I think I think as well. Sorry, just to go back to Gray as well. Like Gordon could be leaving as well. I think to go to Chelsea.
Yeah.
Seems fairly likely, which is seems absolutely mad to me. To be honest,
I don't really understand that one.
When you take into account the price. But anyway, I guess that means Gray's minutes are higher as well, and you can see when he plays last season, his underlying data is okay, like pretty good for his price, I would say. So that's maybe why he's an option as well, just because his expected minutes are a lot higher now with Richarlison leaving, but now also with potentially Gordon leaving.
Yeah.
Sorry, and then you were touching on Neto. Yeah, it's interesting because it's like you can see, can't you, looking at that data there from last season, why he was so popular at the beginning of the season.
XG.
It's fine if you've got Neto to keep him. I think, like that's one thing I'd probably take away from this is if you've got Neto in your team, like don't see him as like a fire you need to put out, but maybe as like maybe you need to restructure and try and get a similar price player as a defender, or maybe prefer like Rodrigo in the short term, for example. But it's definitely like not an immediately I need to get him out kind of transfer.
No, he's more on there just to show what you could be doing with the money elsewhere potentially, and it's the fact that he's dropped already is the issue. It's his price changes I come back to again, isn't it? He's there for a yardstick more than anything, but it's so annoying that these players drop when I picked Neto on my team and I feel like I had to abandon him early, and I actually think over the 7-8 game week period, given Wolves fixtures, he's still a very viable option, and I would have liked to just have hold that. Like, I know people may call me crazy, but Wolves do frustrate though, don't they? Watching the game, they're obviously a very good team on the ball now. They've got lots of very technical players. They just don't seem to be able to find a way to generate high XG chances. Nearly all of the way they create chances are Neto cutting in on his left foot and shooting from long range, or trying a cutback, which usually ends up to Neves or someone on the just outside the D of the penalty area and having a long shot. There was a few times where they broke in against Spurs and had a header maybe close to the box, but it's quite a common thing for Wolves, I think, where a lot of their chances are very low XG. Maybe that will click at some point, given the calibre of players they've got and the fact they've changed formation. It might be just a thing that'll work into it, but it seems like Jimenez, as much as he's declined as a player, it seems, is still quite key to the way they need to set up closer to the box and have that presence around there. So it'll be interesting to see how that works moving forward, because they were so tragic last year. Their decline was ridiculous, and now they've brought in all these nice technical players. Are we suddenly going to see an upside? But it just seems to be that same problem of creating decent quality chances. Almiron and Bailey are on here again. I think obviously they're cheaper than the others. They're 5 and 4.9 million. Almiron's on here just simply because he scored against Man City. You know, people were talking about him pre-season a little bit. His data is just not good enough for me for a long time. I like the way he's starting in a front three position. It's cheap enough where you could punt it. But I just don't like him personally. I haven't answered.
His data is horrendous.
Yeah.
And it's not even like that's him like having a really staggered season. I was really surprised when I looked at his minutes, and he played loads last season as well. His underlying data for those listening, his XG per 90 last season was 0.11, and his expected assists per 90 last season was 0.03. 0.03. Yeah. And
for balance, it's had a massive jump so far, but it's 3 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's playing with better players now, I guess. Like, they've made good signings, some of them in January last season, etc. So maybe he'll improve, but I just couldn't bring myself to make that pick.
I think part of it's fixtures as well. Though Newcastle's fixtures take a bit of a turn soon. Bailey at 4.9, he's right down the bottom now. It's interesting because he seems like his minutes have now got better, given the fact he's scored again in the Cup, and historically his data, although it doesn't suggest it here, I thought was a little bit better than that coming from the Bundesliga, but that surprises me. I thought when he first signed, I was quite excited about him, so obviously that's from last year from Villa, isn't it? So that would explain why. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Villa's games are pretty bad now, aren't they? And obviously the situation there, I don't think I think he's fine, to be fair. I think he's fine just to have in your team at that price. It's 0.4 more than Reed. So if you've got it hanging around, I'd rather have Bailey on my bench to come on than Reed. But using him as a starting player over this period doesn't feel optimal.
It's funny you say that, because I literally just sold Bailey for Reed last week.
Oh, really? Okay.
just to save money.
Yeah, I think that's been a strategy that a lot of people have looked at to save it. But that's obviously the one that caused you to lose that 0.1, isn't it?
Yeah, painful. But yeah, I think as you said, it's just Bailey's one that you probably don't want to rely on as your only playing first sub.
No,
because it's unlikely you shouldn't want Bailey to play him every week now, because we know he's going to be in and out so much. But also, you'd rather have a first sub that's a bit more boring, that's going to play every week probably as well, I would suggest.
Yeah.
So I think particularly if you're only playing 4-3 or 4 at the back, and you can get like a 4.0 or 4.5 defender first on the bench, I think that's a better option. So for what you probably need Bailey for, I think there's lots of other better options now.
Agreed. Right, shall we move on to... I've put together my usual Man City team for this week. It's early days. We've not had the press conference yet. It's on the screen here, so I'll talk through it. Ederson in goal, Kyle Walker at right back. We've got Stones and Diaz at centre back, Cancelo at left back, Rodri, Gundogan and De Bruyne in midfield, and then we've got Foden, Haaland and Bernardo Silva up top. Like I say, it is very early days and we've not seen the injury news. So I think at the moment, given Man City's injuries, the team's quite solid. I think if Ake is suddenly magically fit and back, there's a very good chance he would come back in for one of Stones or Diaz. I feel like it would still be Stones at this point, but remind me, we'll talk about Diaz again in a minute, because obviously he dropped this week. I think the fact that Grealish has still got this knee knock means that I've excluded him. I think if he's fit, I would have to reassess again. I think given Pep's comments about control, the fact that the game against Palace strikes me as a similar game in terms of countering ability, like we saw against Liverpool with Zaha. St Maximin, it's a similar situation there. And he specifically mentioned afterwards he likes players who can control the ball to stop that situation arising. That would make me think that Grealish would play this game if he was available. But at the moment, doesn't look like he is. The main area of risk for me would be Bernardo Silva at the top right there. So I think that could easily be Mahrez. I know he played all of the minutes in the friendly, but I don't think that matters. I think, like I've talked about, momentum with Pep is a thing. He's mentioned Mahrez many times as a player who can play if he wants to every 3 days, and he is obviously, that's his specialist position. So I think Mahrez for Silva is very, very possible, and as a result, Silva could play where Gundogan is, especially as, again, if we're talking about control, I think Bernardo Silva in centre midfield, as good as Gundogan is an option as an individual, and as good as he is as an option to enable Haaland and to get that sort of pressure in the box, give Haaland takes the space, Gundogan runs in, or vice versa. Silva offers a lot more control in centre midfield for me, and he was obviously fantastic at it last season. So we're still not 100% if the Silva thing was the whole links to other teams or whether it's a particular tactic for Haaland. I think I'm more edging on it's a tactic for Haaland at this stage now, seeing as though it's carried on. But I do think he's still a slight risk, Gundogan, where Silva could come into that centre midfield spot and Mahrez could therefore play on the right instead of Gundogan. So those 3 players, Gundogan, Silva, Mahrez, I'm not sure which 2 of those 3 will play, basically. Outside of that, given the injury news we got, I think the team's fairly clear that it will be something like this.
Are you still expecting them to sign another fullback, or do you think that ship sailed now?
I think he come out and said it's not going to happen. So
yeah.
So I don't think it's going to happen. No, I think Gomez is it. So they're going to roll like that. I think if they need to use right backs at any point, then Stones will be used there. Again, this whole preemptive thing. People saw firsthand why Pep has used Stones at right back, despite people saying, well, you need Walker for countering. Well, if you don't lose the ball at all and you've got more control, then you don't need him to counter. And Walker got torn apart anyway. So if Stones is able to keep possession of the ball better at right back than Walker, then he could use him there and sort of preempt that situation. I don't think it's a worry for now, given the injuries that they've got anyway, but it is something to think about long term maybe. So yeah, the Diaz one, people had issues with that. I think thinking, well, if they look back at last season, Diaz did drop out a few times, and yes, it was often the home game, I think just before Champions League, where it could just have been rest. But he specifically, as mentioned, using Stones for his better progression of the ball. He's better a passer. Diaz has not been at his top level for quite a while. I've mentioned it quite a few times. I think when they lose Laporte, they lose a lot of passing out of the back. Ake's he's good. They're all good, don't get me wrong, but Laporte and Stones are their best 2 passers out from the back. So when you play Ake and Diaz, you do lose a little bit of that. So I do feel like he brought Stones in, who's been immaculate every time he played. I know he didn't cover himself in glory in that game from the highlights I've seen and what people have said. I haven't seen the game, but that's what people say. That's what he was trying to achieve there, I think, is more control in the game to stop the counter. It didn't work. They still managed to counter. But moving forward, I don't think Diaz is 100% nailed in games. It is horses for courses. Stones will occasionally come in, I think, and there is always the chance that he could replace him. But until we've got Laporte and Ake back, you don't have to worry about it, right? Once Laporte's back, just to go back on that, they've now got that player who can pass out from the back, and Laporte and Diaz would probably be the first choice pairing, I think, long term. I think all the information we've got over many seasons now is that when Laporte and Diaz are available, they generally have played. There was that one season where Laporte didn't play for a lot of it because he had injuries and he dropped out of the team. But outside of that, those 2 generally play. So I still feel like they are the first choice when available. Have I just mumbled and gone all around the place there with people? Did that make some sort of sense?
Made sense, mate.
Right, okay. So I wouldn't get Stones. I wouldn't panic on Diaz. Cancelo is still the clear pick. People have mentioned, I think one of the questions we had actually was about Cancelo. He's had a bit of a drop off because of his role. I think with Cancelo, you pay for the security of starts. If you react to 3 weeks of data, I think you're in trouble. I think we've seen the fact that he can play left back, right back, inverted, or he can play on the outside, and that can change in any given game week. You know, there's nothing to say that he won't change it. I think in the second game, Cancelo played more as a winger than inverted. I can't remember which way around it was. It wasn't West Ham. It was the other game. I can't remember what it was now. And that was the game he got an assist in as well. He got an assist in the friendly yesterday. Funnily enough, when he turned to right back. I think he went to right back when Wilson Esbrand came on. It's going to chop and change. I don't think you can just say, Cancelo's been poor for 3 weeks, I'm going to get rid. There is a big enough gap, like I said at the beginning of the season, when you've got Walker, where the value is still okay to have Walker over Cancelo, but I think you will get yourself into trouble with minutes, with the fact that he kicks up bonus, the fact that he can change his role in any given game, and I still like Cancelo. But I will admit, I'm a massive Cancelo fanboy, so maybe I'm biased.
Yeah, I agree with you, mate. I think Cancelo is just the obvious pick. Still, for people who don't own him, I still think he's a good buy as well at this stage. Definitely, in my opinion. And I think, based on what you've just said there though, like you wouldn't buy a centre back or Walker, but you wouldn't panic if you own them, basically.
No, I wouldn't. This is why I went in my team with Ederson and Cancelo. The reason being is I thought all of them were slightly at risk in some way. And that's why I did it. I think that if I could go back, I'd probably would have Walker over Ederson. So I think he's the next viable option. But we saw in the game that we just, he's not quite the same level of player that people see. He can be got at now. And historically, I think he's played 2,000 minutes around roughly in the last couple of seasons. Now there has been other factors behind that, but that does suggest he's not fully nailed as well, right? But I still think Walker's fine. I wouldn't be looking to panic. And Man City are right at the top of the clean sheets for the next 4 weeks. It's not a move you need to be making for me. So yeah. Yeah,
if I could go back, I'd have Captain Saliba last week and bought some Maxima.
Yeah, well, Saliba at that price is obviously another reason why you might look to sell a man like a Diaz to a Saliba to free up money. Yeah. I don't think that's terrible given the fixtures. You could do that. But yeah, no, that's the team that I think will be able to play. And like I said, the three options, Gundogan, Silva and Mahrez, I'm not sure which two of the three will play, but we're fairly confident the others with the current injury information we've got. So hopefully I get something close to a 10, sort of 11 out of 11 or 10 out of 11, we'll see. What else we've got to talk about, Sam? We're just the review team, isn't it, before we finish off?
Yeah, then we're done, I think. So for those who don't know, the review team is basically a team we're running where we use reviews, massive data model, and we set it up as it advised as their optimal squad at the beginning of the season. And we literally just log on every week, we check the score, we go on to review, and we make the top suggested transfer in terms of expected value. And it's interesting because of the low...
I'm just going to close my door while they're making a little noise. So.
Yeah, no worries. Because of the low prices, the team's it's had very little to do each week so far. So even this week we've got 2 transfers, but it's only suggesting to do one. It's just suggesting to do netto to gross as the transfer. It suggested Diaz to James in game week 3, so that's what we did then. And it's currently 1.7 million in the world at the moment. Have you got the team on the screen?
I've just put it up now while you were just finishing. Okay. Yeah. Did you mention he got 44 points in it, which was the same as me
44,
this week?
44, yeah. It started with triple Man City defence and went off that last week, went Diaz to James. That was it suggested doing that role in the transfer. Then this week it suggested the same, just netto to gross, roll the transfer. In fact, like something I think the 6th best option that it recommended on the website was actually to burn a transfer for itself this week. But literally the team is built on the massive data model, so we're going to expect that regularly, I guess.
Yeah, and it does depend on what settings you apply for free transfer value. I think it values burn quite highly at 1.5.
So we have it on the default settings and set to the next. I think at the moment it's on the next 5 game weeks. We're doing it as if we're trying to do it as if most people would think. So as if we probably wildcard 8 or 9. So we've got it set up like that. And then we'll have to do some things based on intuition, like when we play chips and stuff when we get there. But most stuff we just let it decide what to do. And it's just, so at the moment we're both beating it actually in overall points league. We'd be happy to know.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, it looks very similar to my team, to be honest. But it doesn't look like it's got any problems to me in the coming games. I don't particularly like Alisson in goal, but Liverpool have got, I mean, he's been better value than Robertson so far, hasn't he? So they seem to be right on that so far. And they've got obviously Bournemouth at home, so I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps a clean sheet there. So yeah, the losing of money is potentially an issue, but I do think it's more set up for the longer term with Solanke to come in with Kane already over Haaland. It's already potentially a couple of transfers ahead of me, maybe by just seeing it through and not too far off me anyway. So there we go.
Yep. So that's where we're at with that, and we'll have an interesting experiment over the rest of the season.
Yeah, we'll see how it gets on. I think that's it, Sam. Did you want to do a wrap up? I hope you guys in the chat have enjoyed it. It's good to be back, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been great. I'll just say we had like a few questions we went through, but we actually just answered them as we went then. So we had questions from Jack Walker, James Owens, ATO Index, YC Young, and FPL Royalty all on Twitter. We've answered all your questions as we've actually gone over the podcast. Apart from one that says, "Should we sell TAA?" And our answer to that is no.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, the rest I think we've covered as we've gone. Thanks for listening again. It's been great. There's been about 90 people watching, which is really encouraging. We appreciate it. And we'll probably be back next week with an earlier podcast, we think, just because of our weeks. We think we'll be going to be recording it on Monday, possibly. But if you follow us on Twitter, we can keep you up to date on that. Subscribe on YouTube as well. And Captain Salah.
Love it. Superfly with the you can't resemble Putin and then keep the same hairstyle, mate. Mohawk, long hair, anything. Great stream. Yeah, I get that a lot. I get Putin, Tom York. I get it a lot. But yeah, thanks for that. I'll take that on board and I'll try and change my hair. Read my exact question out, Jack War said. Did he? Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. But anyway, we'll catch you later, guys. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.